Dr. Kirsty Hughes, would a hard Brexit really cost the Scottish economy nearly £13 billion?
Well, I think these Scottish Government estimates, the paper they come from looks like a very serious piece of analysis, and it looks at the different amounts of damage you get from Brexit if you go for a relatively soft or a harder Brexit. So I find it perfectly plausible that you could end up with that sort of amount of damage. It equates to over an 8% fall in GDP compared to where you might have been otherwise. And to some extent, it's in line with other independent studies. It's perhaps at the pessimistic end, but it is in line with other independent research that's asked similar questions.
Kirsty, you mentioned a softer Brexit, and even if the UK retains single market membership, it would cost Scotland £4 billion a year. Is that really so?
I think that's quite possible. I mean, the Scottish Government, on the one hand, is calling for a compromise for the UK to stay in the single market and a customs union with the EU, but the paper actually only estimates what happens if Scotland and the UK stay in the single market. So I think if you had the full soft Brexit that Nicola Sturgeon is asking for, it wouldn't be that much damage. But other studies, again, have looked at what happens if the UK followed Norway or what happened if it followed Switzerland, and they have found similar levels of reduction in GDP over time of the order of 2 to 3 percentage points.
David Scullion, the Scottish Government says that this economic analysis is more substantial than anything the UK Government has provided. Do you accept there is value in this analysis?
Well, Kirsty's absolutely right that this is definitely a pessimistic report. And, you know, where do we start with this report? When I read it, I thought it was a bit like an extended whinge or just a really long, boring press release that's just from rehashed sources. I mean, you know, it goes all the way back to the referendum campaign. It cites statistics that the Treasury made during that campaign, extremely pessimistic, a lot of which have been disproven. You know, it's worth remembering what some of these bodies predicted. The Treasury, the OBR, the World Bank, all of these things predicted we'd be in dire recession right now. And what have we seen? We've seen a 10-year manufacturing high, we've seen record employment, and we've seen business confidence increasing. The economy is growing and people are in work. So, you know, utterly discredited. This is Nicola Sturgeon, increasingly isolated, hasn't accepted Brexit, hasn't accepted that any responsible government should be trying to make the most of something, even if they don't agree with it.
David, if you think this, the figures are wrong and overly pessimistic, what's your analysis of the cost or indeed the benefit of Brexit? Presumably you think it's going to bring benefits.
Absolutely, yes. If we do it right, if we get out of the customs union and out of the single market, which is what people voted to do, then absolutely we can make the most of it. Look, we need to be looking to the future, and the future is in countries in Asia like China and Japan, and we need to be trading with those. The EU accept themselves that 90% of world growth is going to come outside of the EU, so we need to be in a good position for the future trading relationships with these kind of countries where the future growth is going to be, and we need to move away from these tired models like the customs union and the single market that just put constraints on British business and put constraints on other things like that. So you know, we need to move out of these organisations, and there's no such thing as a soft Brexit. The only Brexit means getting out of the customs union and out of the single market.
Kirsty, what's your reaction to that? We've got to get away from these tired models of being in the single market and the customs union, and there's all sorts of benefits waiting out there for us.
I mean, I think there's so much wrong with what David just said, it's hard to know where to begin. I think it's not helpful when you're faced with a very serious piece of research and analysis to dismiss it as a press release. I mean, when you look at what the UK government brought out as supposed impact reports, they were actually simply a sort of description of the aviation sector, for instance, whereas this is actually a serious piece of analysis, and we have yet to see even what the UK government means by wanting a deep and special relationship. It's also quite wrong to say that somehow the UK is doing terribly well since it voted for Brexit. Apart from the fact we haven't left yet, the UK has gone from being one of the best performing G7 economies in 2016 to at the bottom of the G7, and our growth, whether it's the OECD or independent researchers, everybody says is a lot lower than it would have been if we hadn't voted for Brexit. And that's before we've left. So to give this romanticised gung-ho view of both where we're at and where we might go in terms of trade deals. The EU has just done a trade deal with Japan. The idea that the UK on its own is going to be able to do as good a trade deal is wrong. And also the idea that putting up trade barriers, non-tariff barriers, tariff barriers with our biggest market, the EU, is going to do anything other than damage our economy is quite wrong. So I wonder why David not just dismisses the Scottish Government's research, but the research of independent academic people in London, in Brussels, in Glasgow.
All right, David, you come back in here. David, putting up tariff barriers is going to be disastrous.
Look, all of these organisations were proven wrong. They all had egg on their faces. Why are we now believing them? Why are we expecting Scotland? No, their predictions were for after the vote. Their predictions were after the vote. Right now we're supposed to be in recession. Right now we're supposed to be in recession.
Hang on, let David just answer. You can get a quick reply in a minute.
Absolutely wrong. Their predictions were for that there'd be an immediate recession after the vote, and we have not seen that at all. We have record employment. And let me just talk a bit about the customs union. What we've got in the customs union is a protectionist racket that claims to be this free trading area. But what does that mean for farmers in Africa that can't export finished coffee into the EU? It means that they can't add value to their goods. It means that they've got this high tariff wall around the EU. They can't export their way into prosperity. And leaving the customs union, leaving the single market, means that we can help people like that. And it means that we can export with our own businesses to countries in the developing world and to the emerging markets in Asia. It will improve prosperity for Africa and both for our country as well.
Okay, Kirsty, very brief reply to finish off here.
I mean, this is just complete nonsense, pie in the sky nonsense. We're not going to be able to help the rest of the world or ourselves if we damage our exports and trade with the EU, with services could fall in a WTO option by about 60%. And the EU has a trade deal with the poorest world countries called Everything But Arms. We're not going to be able to influence that to make it a better one when we leave.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Lively debate as ever about Brexit. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you.